Hi, welcome to my presentation, Leveraging the Science of Motivation to Learn Languages. My name is Nadu or Nadja. Those are both my nicknames. Either one is fine. And so I'm going to talk about what I think about motivation and how it can help you learn all your languages. So let's begin. As some background about myself and how I became interested in languages, I worked as an English as a second language teacher in 3 countries. So I lived in Thailand and China and then Germany. And while teaching English, I also taught English to a whole range of ages. I taught children, and then I also taught teenagers. And in Germany, I taught adults. So I've seen a lot of language learning, and I've seen a lot of things that happen at all those ages. I also have a master's degree in linguistics. I wrote my thesis on bilingualism, and I'm currently studying for a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. So as a language learner and as a language teacher, I have noticed some patterns in what makes some people more motivated or less motivated, and what causes people to ultimately lose motivation and maybe give up on a language. So I will talk about that. So how did I first become interested in this topic of motivation? Well, when I first moved to Thailand, I worked in a middle school as an English teacher, and at that time, I also wanted to learn Thai. I wanted just to learn basic conversational Thai, and I didn't go to a language school. Instead, I decided to go to language exchanges, and luckily, where I lived, not too far away in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, there were 2 language exchanges, and they happened. One of them was twice a week and one was once a week. But so I had the opportunity to go every week to practice languages. And there were a few things I discovered. First off, I discovered that I was learning Thai much faster than I expected. And even though I didn't actually go to a class and get formal instruction, I found that it was much easier and it was faster for me to learn Thai in this setting where I was just learning from other people. And I learned a lot of things about polyglots. So I met people who spoke 5 languages, 6, 7, 10 languages. And I found that there's something that a lot of polyglots have in common. And there's often a very common backstory that people have. When they learned languages in high school, or maybe earlier, when they learned language in school, they often found it not very interesting. They didn't like it. Maybe they even had bad experiences learning language in school. They thought that they weren't good at it, or they just thought it wasn't fun. And when they became adults and started to learn on their own, that's when they discovered that they really enjoyed language learning. And that's when they made all of their progress in all of their languages. So I found that that's a very interesting concept. So why is it that so many people who love languages actually had the opportunity to learn earlier in life, but didn't enjoy that first opportunity to learn in school, but they only enjoyed it once they were really doing it on their own and going to language exchanges to learn? And the difference that I found was basically mostly it was all about motivation. So there was a huge difference between going to a class and learning a language because you have to learn it, and not really having a choice in what you learn in that language, not really having the choice to pick your topics, but learning because you have to. And going to a language exchange where you can talk about anything you want, you can learn at your own pace, you are talking to actual people who speak the language, and it's very natural. And basically, at language exchanges, people are highly motivated to learn languages. And I think that the environment of language exchanges is also what helps to create the motivation. And in classrooms, people often, especially in school, when you're a teenager, you start from a place of low motivation. And even if you're kind of interested in the language, I think the classroom setting actually often worsens motivation. And so it is kind of a cycle. But so this difference in motivation also is part of what explains why some of the languages I started, I actually stopped. So just some brief background. I speak English, Russian, German, Spanish, and Thai. And in the past, I've learned Latin in high school. I started learning Mandarin and I started learning French, but the languages I stopped learning all had something in common, and it was motivation. So basically, I didn't have motivation to continue these 3 languages, and so I lost them. However, I do think about going back to Mandarin and French, so I might do that. I don't plan on learning Latin, even though I know many people at the Polyglot gathering love Latin. Unfortunately, I am not one of those people. So there are some common obstacles that I've noticed as a language teacher. One of the most common obstacles is just being bored by what you're learning, being bored by the material, feeling overwhelmed by the learning process, or thinking that this language is just too hard. The language is hard and I can't learn it. Not having a practical application for language learning. So learning language but not really knowing what to do with it. Feelings of self-doubt. This is one that I saw often with adults, especially older adults. Older adults often think that they're too old to learn, but I will tell you, you're never too old to learn. Feeling unsure about why you're doing this, not making time to practice, and overall not being motivated. So I will say that all of the things on this list are in some way tied to motivation and not having motivation. So in this talk, I will talk about 3 principles of motivation that you can apply to your language learning. Because if you have motivation, you will make the time to practice and you will make progress. And even if you really want to learn the language, if your motivation starts running out, this is often the reason people quit their languages. And you can always come back, but this is the reason a lot of people end up not continuing with their language. So the first principle of motivation is making the journey the reward. So we know this idea that there's a journey and a destination. And people often say it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I firmly agree with this. And I think that with language learning, you really want to make sure that the journey is the thing that you find rewarding. So in language learning, the destination would usually be becoming fluent or intermediate and reaching a point where you can use the language and use it comfortably without thinking very hard, without struggling. And the journey to get to that destination is working hard to learn the grammar, gain new vocabulary, practice pronunciation. And as you can see, the journey is where all the difficulties lie. So the journey is harder than the destination. Once you're fluent, it's very easy. But this difficult journey is the thing that most language learners kind of love and enjoy. And if you find yourself losing motivation, this is the thing that you should look at first, is making sure that you really enjoy the language process. So there's a famous research paper by Lepper, Green, and Nisbet, 1973. So in this paper, they looked at children who did activities they already liked doing. For instance, some of the children enjoyed doing puzzles. Then the researchers decided to put the children into 2 groups. One group of children was rewarded for completing the puzzles. They were given something like a gold sticker. And the other group, they could do the puzzles, but they were not given a reward for it. And when they came back a few weeks later, they found that the children who received a reward no longer really wanted to do the puzzle. So their motivation to do the puzzle went down. So this was a really interesting finding because it goes against actually a lot of the way that we teach in schools. Because we think if you give a reward for something, that person will want to do more. But actually, if you give a reward for something, you're kind of teaching yourself that I just have to do this thing to get the reward. And if you're wondering if this applies to adults, it does. So Deci et al. 1999 did a meta-analysis on 128 studies on the effects of reward and motivation and found that giving rewards significantly reduces intrinsic motivation. So basically what happens is if you're only thinking about the end goal, what will I get at the end after I do this? Then you go from thinking that you want to do it to thinking, I have to do this. I have to get through this to get that gold sticker. However, this meta-analysis also found that positive feedback from the teacher increases motivation. So social rewards are different, and getting nice words from your teacher does increase your motivation to keep doing something. So, and importantly, intrinsic motivation is also linked to deeper learning. So if you want to learn, you really want to have motivation, not only so you can stay consistent, but because it will help you learn. So this also explains some of the differences between language exchanges and classroom settings. In the classroom, you're learning something so that you can take the exam and get the good grade. So you're mentally framing it as, I have to get through this so I can get the good grade. At a language exchange, there are no extrinsic rewards. So no one cares if you memorized 15 vocabulary words or 30 or 45. You don't actually get rewarded for this. It's just completely up to you how much you learn. And importantly, I think also nobody punishes you. So if you make a mistake or you forgot vocabulary, there's also no punishment, which is also different from classrooms. However, at a language exchange, you do get positive feedback from other people. So like that meta-analysis showed, this can actually help to increase your motivation. So this can explain why polyglots love to go to language exchanges, and why once you start to learn a language on your own, you start to realize you love it, because you no longer see it as something you have to do, but as something you want to do. And of course, you don't have to do like exams. You can just do fun things like play Jenga. So that's a picture of me in Chiang Mai playing multilingual Jenga at one of the language exchanges. I also think this is important to apply to your everyday language learning. So sometimes I hear this idea that if you're struggling to motivate yourself to do something, you should tell yourself, I'll do this and then I'll reward myself. So maybe I'll do this and then I'll give myself like a cookie. However, as we just learned, this is not a good idea because, for instance, right now I'm trying to improve my Thai. I'm trying to learn how to read Thai script. If I tell myself, okay, I have to read this paragraph of Thai and then I'll give myself a cookie, then I'll basically be telling myself, I just have to get through this in order to get the cookie. So my approach is always not to reward myself for doing something, but to really make that thing the reward. So having a language learning ritual that you look forward to, that you enjoy, is a good way to keep your motivation high. So in this case, every day to read some Thai, have a coffee, and give myself a cookie while I read the Thai. That's the way to make this ritual something I look forward to, and not something that I have to do and have to do to get the cookie. If you're struggling with remaining motivated, it also might be that your language learning materials or whatever you're doing is actually not very fun for you. So sometimes we try methods that we don't actually enjoy. We might use a textbook, or we might do something like when I was learning German, I thought, I know, I'll set up a German email and then I'll have to read all these words in German. I actually ended up finding that not very fun and not using that email very much. So if you're losing motivation, just check what methods you're using and do something you really enjoy, like socializing or playing board games or doing activities in that target language. And if you're really struggling to motivate yourself, or if there's times when you just feel like you're very busy and you're not finding that passion, you're not finding that thing that's driving you to practice your language, remind yourself of what you love about language learning. For instance, maybe you like making the sounds of that language. Maybe you like learning new expressions. Whatever it is that you love about language learning, remind yourself of those things. And when you're highly motivated, you can also make a list for yourself of all the things that you love about this language. And that way you can remind yourself of it later. So this is important to remember, because even sometimes when there are things that we love to do, we can still sometimes lose motivation. Or we can sometimes feel that this is getting hard. I'm not sure I want to keep practicing reading Thai. But you can keep your motivation high. You can remind yourself of what is it about this language that you like, and why is it that you want to learn it. So the next principle is to set the right amount of challenge. So as we can see in this picture, you might find something challenging, or you might find it to be a threat. So this idea of challenge versus threat comes from research by Bloskovich, 2008. So in this paper, he basically says that when we encounter a complex problem, sorry, my voice is not very good today. When you encounter a complex problem that causes stress, there's two reactions you could have. So if you feel like you can handle the problem and that you have what it takes, that you can do this, you feel a sense of challenge. So it is a complex problem. There is a little bit of stress, but you feel motivated and maybe excited to take on that challenge. However, you could also feel that this problem is too hard to solve, that it's too difficult. And if this happens, then usually you feel threat. And in this case, you usually lose motivation to face the problem, and you actually start to have like motivation for something else. You start to have motivation to avoid the problem. So this is something you want to be careful of when you're learning something difficult. And in language learning, this is often what happens when somebody thinks, this language is too hard, I can't learn it. So either when somebody thinks this language is just impossible, or they think I'm not good at language learning. Both of these thoughts that people have are not about the language and not about that person's ability to learn languages. It's actually usually a problem with your learning plan. The plan that you've created for yourself is too challenging, and you need to recalibrate it and reset it to be the right amount of challenge, where it's challenging enough to be exciting, but it's still something that you can manage. So I'll give two examples of this from my life. When I was learning German, when I just reached a really basic level of German, like A1, I just learned the most common verbs and nouns and had very, very basic, really beginner level German. I decided that I will start learning, I'll start learning new vocabulary by reading news articles in German. Now, news articles are very advanced. And in trying to read one news article, I realized I had to translate almost 80% of what was in that article. And I realized I'm basically trying to skip several levels ahead. Another example was learning Mandarin. So I moved to China and I worked as a teacher there to Shanghai. And I started to learn Mandarin. So because I reached a good conversational basic level of Thai, just by going to language exchanges and practicing with people, I thought, well, Mandarin is also a tonal language. I can also, I can do that too. I can just go to language exchanges and practice and learn some conversational Mandarin. Well, it turned out that somehow Mandarin was much harder for me than Thai. And when I would try to speak with native speakers, really as soon as I started learning words, I would try to just ask questions or say sentences, and native speakers could not understand me. They could not understand my pronunciation. And I was surprised because in Thai, people could understand me and people told me I was getting the tones right. So I thought, why is Mandarin so much harder? And of course, this was very demotivating because as we saw from that study, social feedback matters. And if people tell you, huh, what? I don't understand. It does start to become demotivating after some time. So how did I handle these problems? Well, with German, I did the correct thing. And you'll see that with Mandarin, I did the incorrect thing. With German, I realized that I am just not ready to read news articles in German yet. At that point, I was really just a beginner, and I didn't have enough of the basics and enough vocabulary to read that kind of advanced material. So I decided to change my learning plan and change my learning materials. I decided to use a lot of German YouTube. So there's a lot of great channels. Like Lern Deutsch mit Anja, Learn German with Anja, German with Jenny. There's lots of great YouTube channels. And I decided I would use those YouTube channels that really teach me like basic sentences, the grammar. I found more materials that were appropriate to my level, which was about A1, A2. And I realized I actually have to master the basics first. I can't just go straight to the end. And with German, that worked because I did master the basics. I did get more advanced. Now I can read news articles in German. Now with Mandarin. Well, with Mandarin, I just kept trying. I kept trying the same strategy. That wasn't working. And I just thought, if I just keep practicing, then they'll understand me. If I just keep talking to them. But that didn't work because the problem really was that I wasn't mastering the pronunciation. And I just kept trying, and people still couldn't understand me. So I just ended up losing motivation. So, and in Shanghai, a lot of people speak English, and I could get by a lot with Google Translate and like showing my phone. So I lost motivation. I stopped learning Mandarin, and I actually switched to learning German instead. And German was easier for me, so I was more motivated. Now, this is not the correct response, and I'll say what I should have done. What I should have done was just recalibrate my learning plan. Instead of trying to speak in full sentences and mispronouncing like every word in that sentence and hoping that people would understand me, I should have really tried to master the basic pronunciation first. I should have learned like a set of words and really focused on learning how to pronounce each of those words, one word at a time, and practiced and practiced. And when I mastered that, then tried to start communicating in full sentences. So if I could go back in time, I would do this. Instead of losing motivation, I would just reset my learning plan to have the right amount of challenge. So how to apply these principles? Whenever you're learning a language, if you're starting to get to the point where you think, this language is just too hard, or I just cannot learn this language, remember the problem really is not the language and it's not you, it's your learning plan. There's something about your learning plan that needs to be recalibrated. Maybe you're trying to skip a level. Maybe you're using material that's too advanced, or maybe your idea of what goal you want to achieve is you're not ready to achieve that goal yet, like speaking in full sentences. Maybe you need to master something else more basic first. So choose appropriate learning material. Don't go straight to advanced materials. I personally try to aim to understand about 80% of what I'm reading, so I don't have to stop and translate too much. And most importantly, identify your weak spots and focus on those weak spots before you move forward. So often, if you feel like you're trying and trying and the language is still too hard, you're probably not paying attention to a weak spot that you really should pay attention to. And so the third principle, third and final one, is to create curiosity. So curiosity is hugely motivating. And I think we all know this because we've probably all taken a class that we found extremely boring and that we had to force ourselves to study for the exam. And then maybe we took a class that we really enjoyed on a subject we really loved, that it was just so easy to be there and learn it because you were actually genuinely curious about it. And so this is a universal emotion, and it is a kind of universal type of motivation. And this study by Rice, 2004, basically creates this kind of theory that all of motivation can be broken down into 16 core desires. And these 16 core desires are behind everything humans do. Like all of the work we do, hobbies, we have interests, we have everything we do is driven by one of these desires. And curiosity is one of these 16 core desires. It's defined as a hunger for knowledge. And when you encounter that knowledge, it results in a feeling of wonder. If you're curious about the other core desires, you can read this paper down at the bottom. But some of them are like power, independence, social contact, family, eating, acceptance. So all of these things define human behavior. But for language learning, I think the one that is really the most important one is curiosity. Also, another paper, King et al., 2009. So they wanted to see if curiosity would be helpful for learning and memory. What they found was basically participants learned some interesting trivia facts in a kind of experimental setting. They learned a trivia fact, and then they, on a scale of, I think, 1 to 10, they told the researchers, like, how curious were they to find out that trivia fact. And 2 weeks later, they tested them to see how much of this trivia they remembered. And what they found was the trivia that the participants were curious about was the trivia that they ended up learning the best and remembering the best. So curiosity is very important and very useful for language learning because it's not just important for motivation, but it's actually also will help you learn and help you remember. And of course, I think this all goes back to language exchanges in classrooms. So when you go to a language exchange, you can talk about anything you want. So you have a free choice of any topic in the world. You can talk about anything you want. You can talk about the things you're truly interested in and use the language to talk about those things. And in the process, you're probably learning better. It's staying in your memory better. And this is different from a traditional classroom setting. In a traditional classroom setting, you don't get to choose the topic. You are kind of given a topic that you have to learn. You don't have a choice. And if you want to get a good grade, you have to learn it. You have to learn a list of vocabulary about something that maybe you're not that interested in. And I think also there's a kind of feeling of it being an unnatural way to use language, because the teacher will say, here, now talk about going to the park, use this list of vocabulary words. But if anyone asked you to do this in your native language, like here's a topic, go talk about it now for 5 minutes with someone and make sure you use all these words. Well, that doesn't sound fun at all. It sounds very constrained, very limited, and just very unnatural. We usually don't talk to people this way. We kind of have an open conversation where wherever our curiosity goes is where we go. So I think this is another reason why language exchanges, people find them so much better, and people feel that they are learning so much faster when they're just meeting with people, practicing languages, and having actual, true, natural conversations. And also, language exchanges have interesting people. So you can use your curiosity in that way, where you're actually using the language to ask someone questions or to learn about their background. And here, a picture of my friends in China, Selena and Kevin, who I met at a language exchange and who helped me with my Mandarin before I gave up. But we ended up speaking a lot of English, and luckily they speak English, so it worked out. So how to apply this principle? Just maximize your curiosity however you can. So if you are using a textbook, remember that you can skip the topics that you think are boring. Sometimes we get kind of locked into something. If we picked a textbook, we might think we have to get through it, or we might pick some method like setting up a German email and thinking that I'll use this will help me. But if you think that the method you're using is boring you, you can skip it. And I've actually noticed that most polyglots actually avoid all of the textbook vocabulary that you usually learn in a classroom. So often at the beginning, you will learn words for you'll learn like house, bus, train, fruits and vegetables, animals at the zoo. You learn all these kind of everyday nouns that you don't actually need to use that much in your life, but they're kind of like simple, easy things that you can show a picture of. And for some reason, language classrooms often teach you this, and no one finds it interesting, but they all teach it anyway. And I've noticed most polyglots, when they're learning on their own, they just skip this. They don't know the words for fruits and vegetables, and they don't care. They're fine with this. So polyglots usually, what I've noticed, often actually learn the things that are most relevant to them first. So how they learn the words about their career, their background, their hobbies and interests. So if they're interested in physics, they will learn how to talk about physics, or their job, their hobbies. So just remember that whatever your learning plan is, you can make it completely tailored to what you're interested in. And these are just some quick examples. For instance, if you're interested in world history, you can learn about world history on Wikipedia in that language. I love reading Wikipedia, and I think for intermediate levels, Wikipedia is a great way to pick up new vocabulary. If you want to practice Spanish, you can watch an interview with a Spanish-speaking celebrity. You can get the news in your target language if you're advanced enough. You can do really anything, like watch YouTube, consume social media. If you like online quizzes, you can do that in another language. You can also really be the director of what you talk about. So when you go to a language exchange, you can bring a list of words, expressions, discussion topics that you're interested in, and you can make the conversation you have about those topics. Sorry, my voice is weak today. And most importantly, when you're learning a language, you can just make a point, even from the very beginning, when you're a complete beginner, to learn words for the things that you are interested in. So you don't necessarily have to learn what's in the textbook or even the most common words. You can learn what you're most interested in first. And this will keep you highly motivated, because then you can talk about what you care about right away. So we're coming to the end. So basically, just to review, these are the 3 principles of motivation that I think are very useful to apply to language learning. So you want to make the journey the reward. This means making the actual process of learning the language the thing that you find rewarding, and not just the end goal of becoming fluent. Set the right amount of challenge. So if you feel that it's getting really hard, remember, it's not the language and it's not you. Those are the most common things people think. Those are the way they push the blame. It's the language, or it's just me. It's not that. It's your learning plan. And make sure you're always using your curiosity, just using the language to talk about things that you're interested in. And if you remember this list of common obstacles from the beginning, I would say most of these obstacles can be addressed with these 3 principles. The only one that I did not include is actually not making time to practice. I think not making time to practice is challenging because sometimes it's not related to motivation. Sometimes there's other reasons. So someone could be highly motivated, but I still struggle to make time. But all of the other common obstacles, like being bored, feeling overwhelmed, having self-doubt, I think most of these really common obstacles can be addressed by just trying to change something about your motivation, increasing your motivation to learn. So we are at the point for questions. If you enjoyed this talk, you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. I just started it, so there's not that much on my YouTube channel right now, but I will be releasing more content, mostly about English and learning English, because I did teach English. That's what I know best, and more strategies for language learning. So yeah, if you're interested, please subscribe. And I will look at the questions now. Okay. So a question from Larry D. White. How does the European language learning system A1, A2, B1, B2 fit with the quoted motivation studies? How does it fit? So I think the learning language system is just a way to kind of get an idea for what level someone is at. And so the motivation studies, I think these principles of motivation can really apply to any language. But the European language learning system is useful for you to know which level you're at and to choose material that is appropriate for your level, that won't be too challenging or too overwhelming. So basically, for me, this learning system helped because when I was learning German, I did take an online test that tells you, like, if one of these like free online tests, that you answer some questions in German and tells you you're level A1 or you're level A2. So it helped me because it actually helped me know exactly what level I'm at and that I should search for material for that level. But the general kind of approach to motivation, it can apply to any language. So whatever language you're learning, try to get an idea of what level you are and try to find material that is about your level, that is slightly challenging, not completely easy, because then you're not learning anything, but that is slightly challenging, but not like overwhelmingly challenging. And it depends on the language since there are different systems for getting your level. But I think these principles of motivation apply to any language. So I will look at Vanessa's question. Do you have any strategies to re-empower your students who suffered linguistic trauma in a social setting? Oh no, repeated negative feedback, even rude comments on their language skills accent. Oh boy. Yes, I know. I'm familiar with linguistic trauma. Yes, so I do have I do have strategies. I think the first strategy really is, I think specifically for this question, if they have negative experiences with feedback, is to create some kind of setting where they feel that there's really low pressure and like no consequences and no punishment. So, like I mentioned, at language exchanges, no one cares if you make a mistake, and no one is checking, how many vocabulary words did you learn since last week? No one is checking. So, to try to create as much of this kind of atmosphere as you can. I think often students are afraid of direct contact with the teacher because they know that you're the one who evaluates them. It's good to try to create kind of like small groups, ideally with students who like each other, if you can like get an idea of that when you're a teacher, and to try to get them to just practice with each other and not feel like they're being watched or evaluated, or to tell them, I'm not evaluating, I'm just trying to get you to practice. And if they did get a lot of negative feedback, I think the way to counter that is to give them a lot of positive feedback. So, a lot of positive feedback, especially that they're trying and that they're speaking, because I think students who are afraid to speak, they need the encouragement. And I think they often need it actually like repeatedly. It really helps to say that you're doing, even if they make mistakes, to say it's okay if you make mistakes. The fact that you're practicing is good, you are improving, to really try to show them that you're proud of them for trying and to make that the focus. The process of practicing is the focus, not the end goal of speaking speaking at a perfect level. Okay, I will look at Sybil's question. Do you have any specific pointers for what to do when motivation that used to work runs out, stops working? Yeah, that's a good question, Sybil. And I do think this is kind of a hard question, but I think it's hard because I think it depends so much on the individual situation. But I think if motivation that used to work runs out, you have to kind of reflect and think to yourself what changed. Why is this motivation no longer working? And is there maybe something else that's getting in the way? Like maybe there are other things that are on your mind. So sometimes it's not just that the language, there's something about the language that is demotivating you. It might be that other things in your life are taking away your motivation, or that you're really focused on other things. And in that case, I would say like try to adapt to whatever the situation is. Try to see what exactly changed, why this motivation ran out, and if you can find a new source of motivation or change something about your learning ritual. And sometimes it might be a good time just to take like a little break. So sometimes that also happens. If there are other things that are really pressing, it is okay to take a break and come back later. Sometimes then the motivation will come back. Yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, I will look at Lara Kmeth. It doesn't seem to find interesting resources. Oh, I don't seem to find interesting resources in my new target language, Dutch, the same way that I have in previous target languages. Lots of Dutch YouTubers seem to do it in English. Oh, yeah. So I keep looking, but I end up caving and just listening to stuff in Spanish or French. Okay, interesting. I haven't learned Dutch, so I'm actually not, yeah, I didn't know, but it makes sense. if they speak good English, that they might stick to English. Oh, any suggestions? I think I do have a suggestion, like a YouTube channel. Easy Dutch is one YouTube channel you can check out. They you might already know it because it's part of the like Easy language series. Yeah, let me think how to find material. I think there could be ways that you kind of get around this. For instance, if you watch a movie or a TV show, you could try to just change it to having being dubbed in Dutch. This is kind of like an inauthentic way to get experience with Dutch, but you could try that. Maybe I would say if you do have language exchanges around, you could go to a language exchange and talk to other people who are also learning Dutch and see what they're using, basically to ask around. Because if this is the case, that Dutch YouTubers often use English, then maybe other people who are learning Dutch have similar problems and maybe have found other materials. Sorry, I wish I knew more about Dutch specifically. But yeah, I think really just keep looking and ask other people who are learning the language because they've probably found the same problem. Okay, so Sylvia says, the language classroom depicted in the talk seems a bit old school. What is your opinion on the communicative approach? Task-based learning, total physical response, authentic material. It does sound old school, but actually this is how I learned. And I would say this is how I learned in high school. And when I took a German class, like an intensive German course in the summer of 2019, it was still a bit like that, actually. So I will say maybe it varies. So it's not like 100% has to be that the language teachers are pushing you to learn things, but sometimes we do things that you just find not interesting. Like in my German course in 2019, we had to do like a role play that we were on a talk show, and I really didn't enjoy that. I really found that like not enjoyable. Although that would probably fall kind of under like task-based learning. So although yeah, that would fall, I think, under the communicative approach. So I think I do think that probably the classrooms now are in fact becoming better. There's more authentic material and there's more like discussion questions. I think total physical response for children is great. I've mostly read about total physical response as like a way to teach children. I don't know if if we do that with adults. With children, I think that's great. Yeah, I think children learn really well when they're like moving, engaging, when they're not sitting still. So total physical response, I 100% support for children. Task-based learning. So task-based learning is like you have to use the language in order to complete a task. I think if it's a task that the students are interested in, that's very good. But if it's something like, work together, pretend that one of you is selling tickets at a train station and one of you is buying them. If it's kind of like this kind of like artificial task, it might have the same problems. But I think overall, I think what you're getting at is like if you have a language classroom where it's really about really just using it to communicate about what you're interested in, that sounds like a great classroom. And authentic material, I think, is also great. But I think again, it always has to be authentic material that the students find interesting. And this can be a challenge because sometimes the teacher will choose one kind of authentic material that's for the whole class, thinking the whole class is interested. But sometimes it just happens that you have a class with maybe 30 students. They're not all 100% interested in the same thing. So I think the more you can kind of let students choose what they're interested in, the better. But overall, yeah, I agree with you that the more the language learning is really about like communicating and using it authentically, the better. And if you can get that in a language classroom, that's great. Okay, and Matthew Moe. How does the speaking from day one approach help with motivation? Matthew, I think this really depends on the situation. So I used to speak from day one, and I actually started to rethink this. But I'll say this. I think if you personally really enjoy speaking and you like the feeling, then you should try to speak from day one. But just be cautious. to make sure that you're using the language right. Because I used to basically always speak from day one, and I think there's a bit of a side effect I've realized, just I learned myself, maybe not everyone experiences this, but when I started speaking German, I would actually make mistakes. But since I was so new at German, I didn't catch my mistakes, and I would actually practice the mistakes, and then they would be hard to unlearn. But I personally do love speaking. That's why I usually do speak from day one. Now I try to kind of like have some time where I learn some of the grammar rules a little bit, or learn the right sentence structure first and then start speaking, because I try to avoid those errors. But I think if you find speaking very motivating, then you should make speaking one of your top activities. If you Some people really don't like speaking, and they prefer to first like learn to read, or get input first. So I think basically whatever you find increases your motivation to do that. But my personal caution with speaking from day one is to make sure you are like maybe practice with a native speaker who will correct your mistakes. Because if you are just speaking and practicing and making mistakes, that you might actually be ingraining those errors. Okay, and there's a final question, Timothy Douglas, regarding linguistic trauma. Is there any source you would recommend to me so I can inform myself? I'm not sure if there's a specific source on this. I think if you kind of like Google it, you could probably find it. But I think it's just this general overall experience that sometimes students have in a classroom setting, where if they had like really intense or high expectations kind of classroom that they developed, this kind of like fear, fear of speaking. So like if every time you speak and make a mistake, you have a teacher who comments on it. And it might also depend a little bit like on the culture, how negatively you feel about like making mistakes, or if also the culture of the classroom, if making mistakes is not a big deal. But I think overall, like the way to overcome this kind of like linguistic trauma, or this negative experience from previous settings, is to, if you're a teacher, it's to really try to shift your students' mindsets, and to really show them that you are not the teacher who's going to be strict, and to make that very clear. To make it very clear that it is okay to make mistakes, that you encourage it, that it's fine, that they won't be punished for it, and to really give positive reinforcement when they use the language. And it might take time, but over time, people learn that they're in a setting where they can speak freely. And if you are someone who has this experience, you're afraid to speak, I highly recommend going to language exchanges if you can, or just finding a native speaker that you can talk to informally, who's not like a teacher, but is just like a language partner, who is just there to have a good time with you and have a conversation, and is not counting all the mistakes you make, or it's not going to give you a grade, it's not going to give you negative feedback. So once you start to just practice the language in a more open social setting, I think people like loosen up and feel more comfortable then. Okay, so thank you for all the questions, and thank you for coming to my talk.